It is an ongoing conversation that really started several years ago, both with community advocates and members of this board. 2 years ago, in May, we actually did have a very detailed discussion about improvements to our curriculum, and we were optimistic that many of those improvements would be made. We do know that some of them were made, and I understand from conversations with Dr. Presidio that we have discussions about gun violence awareness embedded in our curriculum at K, 2, 4, 5, 7, 7 and 10th grades, the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th grades. However, I think it would be helpful to have a more detailed discussion of what they are. We also, when we discussed this in 2019, talked about the importance of bringing the parents into this discussion and being partners with them. And so what I think would be very helpful to add to your topic is an update on what that conversation with the community is. Because my concern is that we make decisions around forums and then we don't necessarily have fidelity of implementation associated with it. So I would urge that part of that conversation is the communication with parents in grades, specifically the forum topic said, discussing firearm ownership in grades 11 and 12 with parents, because that's where the health and family life curriculum kind of falls or doesn't have a piece in it. The other piece is that we now are seeing a prevalence of ghost guns. And I don't think there's a real understanding of what ghost guns are and the threats associated with them. From everything from a child being able to order piece parts online and construct them, or to use a 3D printer. And so I would hope that as part of this discussion in a work session that the superintendent would bring to us, that he would also include in that discussion the language regarding ghost guns and how we can embed that into the curriculum. Finally, on suicide awareness and the importance of understanding the impact of guns in a home associated with suicide awareness, I did receive some information from Dr. Presidio. I will forward it on to you because that was, if you remember my topic from 2019, it was gun safety. I now know that I should have used gun violence and suicide awareness because of the fact that most deaths are associated with suicide awareness. So I will be forwarding to both of you and ask for the superintendent to include in that an update on how they address that without creating a risk.
Oh, it sounds good, and we appreciate you mentioning ghost guns specifically and some updates on suicide prevention. And I think a question that we had as well, part and parcel of all of this, is some concern about firearm safety only beginning in 11th and 12th. Because we know, obviously, unfortunately, that not only do we need to have conversations around suicide prevention earlier than we ever have needed to. Sorry, Carl's beeping and booping over here. But also to incorporate the new safe storage law that we have in the Commonwealth of Virginia and start letting parents know about that immediately. So thank you for those comments.
So if I can just, I wasn't clear, I'm sorry. Gun safety starts and safe storage starts in the curriculum as early as kindergarten, according to what they're doing. It's just that at the higher grades, they didn't have a health course, so they were also bringing in parents.
The other thing I would say is that you're right, it is a continuum. How we talk about this issue has changed since I was a kid going to gun shows with my dad. And what I learned in the classroom or from Eddie the Eagle has changed. The language matters too. As I was talking with one colleague, gun violence prevention is very specific to what we're talking about here versus gun safety, which is a part of gun violence prevention. So we've already updated our legislative program to encourage measures that would protect students and teachers and staff and families from gun violence. The superintendent has agreed to notify families annually about Virginia's new secure storage firearm law, which experts say will reduce the likelihood of unintentional or intentional gun violence and suicide. And these questions that you raise about ghost guns and other aspects all need to be part of this conversation. Even just a few years ago, the idea that we would align curriculum with VDOA standards made a lot of sense. But as Dr. Presidio will tell you, there's even more out there that we can be considering. Best practices have evolved, and I think we can evolve with them.
Dr. Anderson?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if Karen's time had expired. Thank you. I have some questions, but I'm not sure if you guys know these answers. If you do, please jump in. If not, maybe staff. Thank you so much for sending what is available right now that I think Ms. Corbett-Sanders referred to earlier. I did want to touch upon that, but I believe she covered it. There's no policy right now regarding gun safety, gun violence, prevention. There's no existing policy at all.
Policy, I'm not sure there's policy, and that's partly why I think this forum topic is here.
But you have regulations?
We have, from the prior forum topic, follow-up that we've placed in our curriculum. I don't know that it's a reg per se. I'll have to defer to see if anyone on our staff knows if there's a regulation per se. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
I didn't find regulations or policies when I looked for gun safety, gun violence, firearm, suicide prevention. Those things are covered in other aspects of policy and regulation in the way that curriculum is developed and whatnot, but those specific issues are not addressed.
I think Division Counsel Foster, Mr. Foster, wants to make a couple comments.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Braybrand. I did want to note that there is, and there has been in place, a Virginia code provision that addresses guns and says that they cannot be in school buildings. As Mr. Frisch noted, this recent code amendment extends that to administrative buildings that are not used for instruction, such as gatehouse and other similar facilities. So I did just want to note that although we may not have a policy or regulation per se, we do have existing Virginia code. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that leads to my second question. Is that also what covers the first bullet of this, or rather could be related to the first bullet of the forum topic, which is to prohibit possessions of firearms on any property? I'd like to connect the dots there a little bit. Is
I can
that
answer
code?
that question.
Sure.
So as Mr. Foster indicated, there's longstanding Virginia code that prohibits firearms from being on school grounds where education happens. But last year, the General Assembly amended additional code. So they had, in 2020, given authority to local governments to bar firearms from public buildings, right? Which our county did. And to clarify whether or not school divisions also got that authority in that law, which was not clear, in 2021, they amended that code to specifically state that school divisions had the authority to develop policies that barred firearms from buildings that we owned or leased that education is not happening in. So they extended our authority.
Okay, so
we
the
would need
authority
a-
exists. I
we would
think what
need a
I'm hearing
policy.
from you all is to codify this in policy of some
Exactly.
sort. Okay, you and I had multiple conversations about this many months ago as well. I think there's space here for us to be a little bit more robust in terms of how we are guiding our students. And as I shared earlier, I think there's a balance there in terms of what we can be expecting from parents. As we can tell them what to do in their homes as much as we can tell them what to put in their refrigerators. I think there's a line there. But in terms of when we have our students, we have this curriculum, I'm happy to engage in reviewing this to see how this can be a little bit more effective for our students. I do have some questions. Are we going to be able to turn this around by March 1? I know you submitted this a while ago, but March 1 is the deadline for this to come to governance, which is less than a month. For the policy draft. Is that feasible? It's less than a month away.
Yes.
Okay.
March 1st for a policy to go to governance, yes, we can get that done.
For some perspective, John gave me, excuse me, Mr. Foster gave me the language for this portion of the forum topic in like, I don't know, 4 months ago.
Right, I knew the timeline was different than typical. If you could speak a little bit now to the second bullet, reviewing the curriculum, that makes sense. Reviewing the safety protocols, that makes sense to me too. What are we looking for the professional development piece? Or what are you envisioning? I know you're looking for staff to fill in that blank, but what could that possibly look like?
Well, I think there's a few things, and certainly, we trust the experts to navigate that. But a few things around professional development, I think we would need to engage with Mr. Vaccarello and his crew as well, of just ensuring that the kinds of exercises that we're doing, make the most sense and are the most up-to-date. The research in this area does change so frequently, and we even look at it when we have conversations about lockdown drills, where we were initially doing 5 a year, and we recognize the kind of trauma and have dialed that back, even at the state level. So, those kinds of things, again, professional development around suicide prevention. We do have the Cognito program that was new, and is really, really good and is required before the school year starts. But continually updating that around best practices for how you recognize, some of the signs, and how you have those conversations, and what is the expectation, just the same way that we have, when we talk about being mandatory reporters for abuse or anything like that. There's a very direct and clear line that as employees we're trained on. We know if this, then this, and we need to probably do a better job around that with suicide prevention.
And to put a finer point on it for the gun violence prevention piece, I think we can definitely, hear from staff about how staff are being trained for what to watch for, what to do when they hear idle chatter in the classroom or in the hallway, how to report different things, how to get help for a student who might be a threat to themselves or others, how to address concerning social media posts, either from their own students or from other students. And that's not to say that we are not addressing some of this already. It's making sure that, again, we have much of this in our curriculum. It's making sure that we are doing it in the best way that we can.
Okay, thank you.
And
Go
just
ahead.
to piggyback on that, just trying to avoid the conversations that we've seen so many times, but Michigan was a good example where there were pieces and people in the building that each had a piece of what was happening. But there was not a very clear defined mechanism for where all of that information gets put, so that a real picture could have been put together, hopefully in time to have stopped what happened.
Okay, thank you. Along those lines, Dr. Braybrand, can you or somebody speak to the threat assessments that schools engage in when there's concerning behavior? How is that shared? Because I think what Ms. Cohen is talking about is making sure that all the persons who are pertinent to a student has that information. How is that used here in Fairfax?
All right, well, there are a couple of things, and then I may let others jump in here. First of all, we have a tabletop annually with all of our schools that goes through all the kinds of potential threats, and it walks the administrative team and other key leaders in the school through those scenarios. I think you're also asking, we have a threat assessment protocol that schools use. And as far as the detail, I don't believe Dr. Boyd is here for that part. That information is shared on a need-to-know basis with the appropriate teachers and parents. That's not something that we communicate out school-wide, but we do threat assessment protocols on anything that has been brought to our attention to determine if that kid is safe to return or would have an impact on the safety of others.
No, thank you. I would imagine that the counselors are part of that need to know because they engage in this work.
Absolutely. And I actually, some years ago, when I was elsewhere for a bit, after the shooting in the elementary school at Sandy Hook, there was a state commission around the threat assessment. We adopted all of the best practice recommendations, and I served on that as superintendent with a group of psychologists, higher ed, the attorney general, And we are following that threat assessment protocol, which has a variety of practitioners on the threat assessment team to make the best assessment possible for whether that kid should return to a classroom or to a school.
Okay, I have two more quick questions. I do want to say, as a former school principal, the tabletop exercises, I think are so key because people must know how to react when they're faced with that emergency. And so I really want to lend full support to that kind of activity. And my last question is, what do you anticipate would be the impact on the SRNR, if any?
That would honestly be some of the work that we would need to do between now and really by the end of July. I don't know that all of it would be incorporated into the SRNR for the upcoming year. I think we need to look at this as a multi-phased approach depending on what we find. What can we do now? What can we do moving forward in the years ahead? But I think what I see in the board debating this topic is it's becoming more, it's always been an issue, but it is frankly coming back to the top of the list of concerns in our community. And what can we additionally do beyond what we've done in the years past to be more proactive in getting the awareness out to families and to students? And so we would take a look at that and bring sort of a menu of offerings and options for the board at the work session.
Thank you. That raises kind of my concern a little bit, but I don't think I have enough time to really articulate my follow-up question. So if there's time, I'd like to go back, please.
I don't think there's going to be time. I just want to say we do have one more forum topic. We've got 7 minutes left, so if we can keep it very high level, and if you have questions or some concerns, we'll just let Mr. Frisch and Ms. Cohen answer at the end quickly. But this is really the request. Are we in a position to just kind of move this forward, and the details would be at the work session? And with that, Ms. McLaughlin, followed by Ms. Dernak-Kofax.
Thank you, Ms. Pekarsky. I know we're on a tight timeline, so I think what's important is making sure that the board members' expectations of what we want to see from staff at the work session has got to be clear, because otherwise we're going to show up at the work session and say, this isn't what we expected. So I appreciate the forum topic and support it strongly. As a former advocate, I want to thank the Moms Demand Action advocates. You've continued to be a very vital voice in helping this board understand a topic that affects our public school systems, regrettably, every year around the country. So anything that we can do to help save lives is profound. I did want to just make sure to Mr. Frisch and Ms. Cohen, thank you for championing this and bringing it to us. Having worked very hard on the suicide prevention and intervention policy that Fairfax County completely revamped a number of years ago, I just want to make sure with its reference to here, is it that you're wanting to see deeper work surrounding gun violence and suicide prevention, as opposed to the global aspects of suicide prevention that I know our division has tried to work really hard at over the years?
Yes and no. I mean, part of it is we certainly want to continue doing what is working and what is best practice. But there are anecdotal things we all hear as board members that we need to run down and see if they're accurate. For example, one thing we've talked with staff about is hearing that while we include suicide prevention in our health curriculum, it's not always taught. And we know that that may have been because of the pandemic, it may have been for other reasons, but we need to run down, not only do we have the best practices as part of our menu, but are we administering it with fidelity of implementation across the school division? Because you can have the best practices on paper, if they're not implemented, they're no good.
And I would also just add, I think it is an ever-evolving, thing. We look at now what we didn't know a few years ago, the role of social media, for example, and its impact on childhood depression, on suicidal ideation. So I think just always keeping up on that best practices to make sure that we're always staying ahead and we don't get, it's too important to get behind here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that very much. When we developed the school board's policy, we also crosswalked it with the regulation to really, and in fact, we put a lot more back into the policy because we wanted school boards across the country to understand how serious and how important the commitment was and the board's expectation around suicide prevention. So we haven't had that crosswalk and that review as a board, so I support that. I just wanted to, again, setting expectations, I wanted to make sure Dr. Brabrand's team knows, I mean, suicide prevention alone is a very deep, very intensive, so when we look at a work session, if we're gonna, I see the way in which they are interconnected, sadly, but I think we'll have to make sure we build in a lot of time to give really careful review to both important subjects, and again, because they're interconnected. So, and anyway, this has my full support. And I really want to emphasize something that Ms. Corbett-Sanders said, because it is something, Dr. Brabrand, that I believe you and your team are trying to get better at. But it is difficult as board members that for years we bring what we think are really important mission critical things, and it seems like it doesn't ever come full circle back to us, the work we direct out. So that's why I think this forum topic will be very helpful for work session to again take stock of the work that many board members, as was noted, have done work in this in the past. And then what's sort of, how do we bring that to completion? And then,
Time is up, Ms. McLaughlin, I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I know Dr. Brabrand kind of wants to bring this together for us, what he's understanding.
Just two quick things. One, I know the audit committee's done some work with us on the follow-on motions and doing a better job of making sure we have fidelity of implementation. And so we're continuing to improve that process and have worked with the board, school board office to do it, and can share some more updates around that. I do want to say, I think I hear great consensus to do a work session, and staff's prepared. And maybe what we can do just to help bring it together, there's 3 buckets that I think are in here: curriculum, safety protocols, and professional development offerings. There may be some additional shaping of what do you want under those buckets that we can do offline or through the chair and vice chair. And as we get closer to the work session, we'll be sure and perhaps even well before it, I can say, here are the things under each of those buckets that you're looking for. So that when we get to the work session, it's not a surprise, hey, something's missing. So maybe shortly after this forum, you can say, hey, some of the things you want to be sure under there, we can work at chairs and vice chair, with the vice chair, and then put back out what we think that work session would look like, and make sure we've got the components that you're talking about, Ms. McLaughlin, before we arrive 2 or 3 months from now and go, here it is. Oh, wait, what about suicide prevention? It's not on there. So that's my suggestion.
I'll put you at the end, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. Ms. Dernak-Kofax.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. I appreciate those comments. I think that will be a good way to proceed because, I think it is a good time to review our safety protocols. I was on the board when the Sandy Hook shootings happened, the tabletop exercises, they were quite extensive as to what we do. And I think the way it's outlined here, I think it is a good time to look at that in the way you outlined it with curriculum, safety protocols, and reviewing all of those things. And Ms. McLaughlin, I really appreciate what you're talking about, the suicide prevention, because we were so extensive in our work there that, we need to see how this particular issue ties into that, but we can't just kind of do it in 5 minutes because that was hours and weeks and months of time. Thank you to all of our advocates who are being here. Thank you, Ms. Cohen and Mr. Frisch, for bringing this forward. Yes, it was a Moms Demand Action advocate in my community who reached out to me when, gun violence took away a graduate who was a dear friend of my son, actually. So I do appreciate that. We've all been touched by this. I know many of you have been touched by it. That's why you're here, family members. So thank you so much for being here. And I am supportive of both of these things. I look forward to, Mr. Foster, if you're comfortable getting that deadline, we can do that. And, I think we do appreciate the existing Virginia code, and we can base our policy on that, looking at that, and then have a deeper dive into what we do and what enhancements we need to make regarding this. So thank you.
Ms. Omesh?
Thank you. I want to thank my colleagues for bringing this forward and everyone who's contributed to this work over the years, and also our advocates who've shown up today and who've been, I know, persistent in getting something done here. Similar to Ms. McLaughlin, I come at this from a student well-being angle, thinking, suicide is more than a third of, gun deaths amongst teens, and it is the second leading cause of death amongst teens after car accidents. So it's something that's near and dear to my heart from a mental health angle. I think especially given this year and just everything that everyone's gone through, being mindful of mental health in our schools is critical. And to that end, I think, that we understand that on a national level, a lot needs to be done, and on a state level as well. And it's helpful to know, obviously, we're in compliance with code. Which brings me to kind of think about context here a little bit. So this gives me a little bit of pause because it's not without cost when we talk about these topics. I'm especially mindful of disparate impact. There are a lot of racist underpinnings to the gun control movement, not to say that that's what it is today, but the way that it's enforced and who's going to carry the brunt of a lot of that certainly concerns me. And I'm mindful that the more we talk about this, the more fear we foment. And I don't know that that's necessarily positive for everyone's wellness from that perspective. No doubt a reality of a national issue, but also hysteria that might leave us a little off-center when it comes to just being realistic. So I know when I had conversations with Ms. Cohen, I had asked about context. What is the context in FCPS? Like, what are the numbers? Do we have any sense? And I know these are not exact, but can anyone shed some light on the magnitude of this issue here?
I don't know I don't know who you're looking to answer. A few things. One, I guess, I would say that in terms of gun violence prevention as excluded from, as separate and unique from law enforcement, I would say one of the major issues around gun violence is that it does impact our Black and brown community much more significantly than any other population. So I struggle a little bit, and I think that's a conversation definitely to be had about a few things. One, I do push back a little bit about the idea that having these conversations creates sort of a panic mode. I think in all of the relevant research that's out there, the conversation is that the more you have these conversations and make them very explicit and very functional, like the Be Smart framework, for example, that gives parents very specific steps that they can do to be helpful. It is tried and true and tested about how that can be helpful to stopping gun violence, and in particular accidental shootings, which is one of the number one things. In terms of in our area, I think what we've seen in some of the impetus for having these conversations towards the end of the year last year was definitely in a school that Ms. Corbett Sanders and I share, two of them actually. We had in the neighborhood some horrific incidents that happened involving some of our students at one of our schools and another family in the neighborhood that adjoins one of our schools. And we all have seen a lot of reports this year, unfortunately, across the country, but even in our district, of kids bringing weapons to school and firearms. And so I think, could I say to you how many people are, shot and killed every year in Fairfax County? I don't have the number on that. Can I tell you anecdotally how many kids in the last year that many of us have seen whose families have been touched by it? It's a whole lot more than I'm comfortable with. So I think,
that for me is a big piece of what can we possibly do to be helpful in this area.
And Ms. Somesh, can I suggest that that could also be part of the information that we get back from staff?
Sure, sure. I mean, but I'm trying to put it into scale because I'm appreciative of some of these initiatives, right? Moving into governance, codifying a policy, thinking of how we can do things a little bit differently and updating what exists, because we teach it and we have the threat assessment protocol, and we have it as a part of PD as been outlined. So I'm just mindful that we elevate it to a conversation. We have less than 10 work sessions left this year. We, take up a tenth of our remaining, or even actually more than a tenth of our remaining work on this topic. We increase vigilance around it when it's questionable and again, is received differently by different segments of our community. So that's just part of my pause, which would lead me to suggest, can our work session be about suicide prevention, given that we are now in a reality where over a third of our anxiety in this country is more than tripled, and prevention can be a component of that. But that we focus on that more broadly, as opposed to this specifically being a gun violence prevention work session. I think there's a lot of work we're already agreeing to along these lines.
Thank you, Ms. Somesh. Time's up.
Yeah, that's a question.
It is.
I'm happy to answer it.
Quickly, please, because
Yeah,
we're
quickly.
going to start late.
No.
That was quickly. All right. Ms. Marin.
Yeah, thank you. I'm pleased that the language I'm hearing is about gun violence prevention. In no way should we be calling this gun safety. That's a misnomer, and it will misdirect people and give them false security. So a few things. One is, I first want to address that, what we as a board take on, tracking our own work. I'm aware that this came up in 2019. There's lots of things that have come up that this board has not done. And while it's the superintendent's responsibility to have the staff do work, it's also incumbent on us to prioritize our work. Even today, we have two really important topics. I'd hope in the future we could just have like one forum topic a month, because clearly we all are passionate about these topics that are brought up by our colleagues. Secondly, I find that I'm thinking about this much like I'm thinking of COVID. Schools and children and families are put in these situations because society allows us to have a lot of freedom around guns. We are doing what we can. We've got curriculum, we've got safety audits, we have professional development. Of course, we can do more. However, I think that the role for our board is to think about this in a larger context, which is the social emotional, the safety of our children. So for me, I see, so the objectives of the forum, one, ensure that, prohibiting firearms, absolutely, no brainer. Two, I think we need to couch it more broadly. When we talk about gun violence prevention related to suicide, that to me is about student mental health. And there's so much more, again, that society and other arms of our local government should be providing. We know that our mental health supports that are provided through the county health services are overburdened. There's not enough. There's a lot of things that we can do, and we can be that gateway, but schools, we can't be the provider of every single thing to combat society's ills. We're not going to do it well. I think our SCIPT committee is actually a really good committee to send this to. Rather than a whole work session. Or if we do have a whole work session, can we couch it in the much broader conversation of our SR&R or of our mental health work? I think having a work session just on gun violence prevention is not, it doesn't have the breadth of where this challenge and this crisis in our society sits. So, I think, I would propose that, around prohibiting firearms, that is a facilities issue. And there's also a big advocacy component here. We could talk about this gun violence prevention and mental health supports when we do our annual legislative work. So for me, I'd much prefer to see this go to SCIPT and work with our county partners, or perhaps go into a larger conversation if that happens with SR&R, or if it happens with some other social emotional curriculum and supports, or even the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. We have, do you want to go, Ms. Keys-Gamarra? You, go ahead, quickly.
So I do support this because I see it as an update, really a follow-on to previous work. How we do that and what instructions comes out of that, I don't think we can solve today. So that was the main thing I wanted to say. But I'm happy to work with the sponsors of this forum topic to provide input and to make sure that the work session is an expeditious use of our time. So that's as short as I can say it. Thank you.
That was excellent. I will just quickly say, I just ditto to that. We don't have a lot of time, but I think Dr. Brabrand seems to have gotten a good indication of what we are expecting and their best thinking around those three buckets. I do have some concern on the timing of the work session, simply because of the context of everything we're doing. So I just want to say that, not that this isn't critically important, just the reality is there are so many hours in the day. But I think we'll definitely work with Dr. Brabrand and staff to try to figure out how to get it done as soon as possible, and to make sure that they have time to do their best work. So this is what you are all, and what we are looking for. And I know you all want to quickly wrap it up in 10 seconds or less.
One, I would say this is not just a work session about gun violence prevention. It's also about suicide prevention, best practices for professional development, and for safety protocols. I would also note that, in terms of timing, we waited almost a year for this forum topic. I think that there's flexibility there. We'll see where we are, but I think we need to be aggressive about our request, because otherwise we could wait almost a year. I would also say that I don't think that this forum topic foments fear. I don't think talking about gun violence prevention foments fear. I don't think the moms in our audience today are fomenting fear in their conversations about gun violence prevention, in the same way that I don't think talking about racism causes racism, talking about student hunger causes student hunger. I think it is important for us to address these issues, to destigmatize them, because ignoring them creates the problem. And as a society, we've ignored the problem of gun violence for far too long. Finally, in terms of the question about the SR&R, Karen Corbett-Sanders and I, Roshna Sizemore-Heiser and I, have already had some conversations about how do you incorporate some of the social media aspects of this problem that we've seen in her schools and other places into the SR&R going forward. So I think that's a starting point and certainly not a finishing point.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks for bringing this.
Point of order.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, so the forum's topic submitted said it would refer to a work session, so do we take a vote or a pulse on that, or?
We're about to.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah. So that's what I was going to do. Let's see if there is consensus to go ahead with drafting that policy, sending off to governance, and trying to get this work session scheduled.
Point
Would
of
you like
order,
to-
Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Can we decouple?
Well,
Yeah.
the
That's
recommend-
fine.
Well, you just said send it to committee, but the recommendation is refer to a work session or other, so.
Two parts.
Okay,
Yeah.
can the chair please speak?
Yeah, there are two parts. So the first part is the policy that will go through governance. And then the second part is the work session that, working with Dr. Brabrand on the topics that have been discussed today, will come. Okay, sure.
The policy going to governance, that would also be brought to the board, I would assume.
That's my assumption as part of this work session.
I know, but as part of the work session, that's the part that I want.
Is that your intention? Okay.
It would be brought to the full board the way that the governance committee decides to bring it to the full board. I would imagine will be, the staff brings us the policy, and then the board will adjust as needed and send it to the full board for consideration.
My reason for asking
Go
that
ahead,
question is because of this conversation, right? I know typically there's adjustments made to our policies and it's on our consent agenda. In full transparency, if we're having this discussion and there's a change, I believe it needs to be a part of that work session so that we have, so the community knows the full breadth of what the results of this forum actually are.
Ms. Cohen, Governance Chair.
Well, the only thing I would just say to that is I do see these as pretty separate and distinct, one pretty straightforward, one, and that I think needs to happen sooner rather than later, especially given some of what we are hearing in context, some of the threats that many of us have gotten. I would feel more comfortable with us having a policy about just the prohibition of firearms. So I guess what I would say as governance chair, I see it coming to governance, getting tweaked or whatever there, but I would propose that it comes to the board as an action item so that people could speak to it at the table, not put it on the consent agenda.
It's also going to be done a lot more quickly.
And if I can just jump in on that, and the policy is very narrow, its focus. So does that help, Ms. Keys-Gamarra? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Narcovics.
When we develop, excuse me, when we develop policy, it can be brought several ways to the board. It can be brought, may I suggest, rather than even if we don't want to bring it for action and we want a discussion point, even if it's a quick thing, we can have a work session, even though lately our work sessions have all been 3 hours, we can have a 1-hour work session on the policy and what it looks like. I don't know if that's,
First, I want to clarify for the community, there is a prohibition already with respect to.
Not lease property, no.
That's the narrow, can you just really clearly talk about what your intention is with the policy?
Guns have been illegal in schools where children are taught for decades.
Yes.
They are not illegal in gatehouse or other FCPS buildings that are not the function of education.
Okay.
The
I'm
law was
sorry.
changed last year to give us the authority to do that. This is a simple policy that would do that.
Okay.
I also had a clarification, Madam Chair,
Okay.
of the work session piece, because I explicitly asked, this is not going to be a suicide prevention work session, but will be titled a gun violence prevention work session. Is that correct?
That's what the intention is,
Just want that to
yes.
be clear. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's try it again. Everybody who can lend their support to go ahead and drafting this policy, and with the work session coming to us as soon as we can work with Dr. Brabrand and get this in front of the board, please raise your hands. Okay, and that vote is unanimous. Thank you. Our second topic, I hope will be a little bit quicker, and I don't think we're looking to debate the merits of the, or the details rather, of the request at the table. I will turn it over to Ms. Corbett Sanders to get us started.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is the first time that this subject has come, I'll wait because we're not going to have 7 people at the table. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, okay.
Sorry.
This is the first time this subject has come to this board for discussion, and it's one that we are hearing more and more about from our students, from our families, and from the community. Many of you will have seen that over the past few months, our students have actually been staging walkouts because of their concerns about sexual assault and violence. And that's not limited to Fairfax County. The previous board took leadership in establishing a Title IX office, and that Title IX office is really focused, for the most part, on the disciplinary aspects of Title IX. What Chair Pekarsky and I are coming to you today with is an ask to get the board's support for the staff, the superintendent and staff, to develop curriculum for K through 12 for neurodiverse students that on sexual assault, sexual harassment, and all of the aspects of Title IX. There's a very good example of this curriculum in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, where it starts in kindergarten and goes through 12th grade. And they have their lessons within the first month of school every year. We are encouraging the superintendent to look at best practices, to bring to us in a work session curriculum on Title IX that would go beyond what we are currently doing, and ensure that it is done on an annual basis. It is a best practice. We are also encouraging that as part of that best practice, it also addresses issues such as consent and It will also address issues such as when a child has gone through the disciplinary process and is re-entering into their community, that there is not only the supports for the victim, but the supports for the student who has been engaged in some of the problematic behaviors to make sure that we do not have repetition. This is fairly straightforward. We would also urge that the Title IX process have more prevalence on the front page of our website, because oftentimes people go looking for it and they don't know where to find it.
Thank you, Ms. Dernak-Kofax, and I will just add that the second piece.
I'm Ms. Corbett's.
Oh, my gosh.
It's the mask.
I was actually looking at Ms. Dernak-Kofax. Woo, I need a little bit more coffee. You were finished, correct? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Corbett Sanders. I just wanted to add that the second piece of this, in looking at some of these best practices, we saw that we have an option, and it is our suggestion to consider and look at forming a student task force that would identify ways that we can address student concerns and ways, we educate and deal with Title IX and sexual harassment issues in our schools. I find it particularly important that we engage our students because it is an obvious topic of interest and concern to them right now, as we've seen with the emails that we have received, the walkouts. And personally, I will say just my own students who are in high school, this is a concern, and there is definitely a need to make sure that they are part of the solution. So it is our request that this is wrapped into this. And the last piece would be really, after there has been an infraction or disciplinary process with violations, what do we do to educate our students, to re-educate them on what behavior has led to these issues? What could they do differently? Maybe a restorative justice, a piece to it. But, we do this with substance abuse violations, and really this should be no difference. I mean, our goal is to educate students, to have them reflect on their decisions, on their behaviors, and think about ways that they could make more responsible decisions in the future to avoid further problems, especially later in life when there won't be that opportunity for reflection and re-education. So with that, I will go ahead and take questions, and we are unfortunately running behind, so if they are high level, maybe we can, Ms. Corbett Sanders, kind of hear thoughts and concerns and address at the end.
That's
Okay.
what I was thinking.
Sounds good. Okay, Dr. Anderson?
Yes, very quickly. Thank you for bringing this forward. I think there's definitely space for our students to be better informed on this process. Others that are covered in health do not. So I'd also like to have some specificity around that when this is brought forward for a full discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Marin?
Yeah, I have two comments. I support this, but I would like to see it expanded to include not only student education, but also staff education and professional development. I am not aware if this Title IX training is required training. I know as a board member, I received a deep dive, and then I think the next time it was just watching a video and clicking through, and that's just not good enough. So I would like to see this topic expand to really encompass our entire caring culture and include staff. I also think that this training should include a component about the social media threats for sexual assaults. And I think the protests that have gone on are an example of that. Clearly, if our students are walking out based on this topic, that there's something that needs to be addressed. And I think it's a complex set of reasons that students are stepping forward. I know I've spoken with families in Madison whose students have participated. But I also think that we really have to equip our students and help our parents and families understand that things that are born of social media are not necessarily clear and, and student-centered. And I do worry about that in the recent incidences that have happened, where that's stemmed from. I want our school division to listen to students, and if they don't feel safe, we have to address it. But I do think regarding this topic, to expand it to include the staff PD is essential. Thank you.
Do you want to speak to that, Dr. Brabrand?
And I know we have Catherine Carroll here. We have a staff requirement for Title IX training already in place that we do as part of my PDE, the professional development portfolio for all of our staff. And the board really helped us build that from prior work that the board did, and that is required training. As far as whether you want, when we have this work session, to discuss any updates around staff, we can certainly bring those if we have any additional enhancements that we would have for staff. I'd have to review that with the team.
Or even just sharing what the professional development is around Title IX.
Sure.
I also wanted, I was reminded, Dr. Brabrand, when I first was on the board, in governance, we worked to update the child abuse prevention policy.
Yes.
And we really worked to make it very specific, if this, then that.
Absolutely.
And I haven't had a moment yet to go back to the Title IX policy and see, is our Title IX policy that crystal clear?
Got it.
So that, I think, is another thing
Sure.
that is integral.
Understood.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. Ms. Keys-Gamarra?
Yes, thank you, and I'm happy to follow my colleague. I was actually going to mention our child abuse policy because that was really an attempt to bring clarification where we had a very, certainly we didn't allow such things, and we had that in our policy, but the steps of staff, the steps that are available to families was not clear in our policy or regulation, and I would similarly like to have that discussion here, with the caveat that part of, I think, some of the, there have been changes in recent years to Title IX that this board has had to try to incorporate. I don't think people understand that or where it has come from. So this is an opportunity to bring about that clarity. As I've watched the things that we have seen in social media and otherwise, that clarity is, it begs the question, where is the clarity? And so I welcome those, an opportunity to have that conversation with transparency. We've, this board, our leadership has tried to do everything that we can to make sure that we're compliant. So we need that. We also need our students to understand what is accessible to them. And so I see this as a way to make sure that that's clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Frisch, followed by Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. I think one of the buzzwords we're hearing today is clarity, and I think we all agree that that's necessary. One thing that comes to mind, and I think this is one of the reasons why it's so important, is that I think we're likely to see changes to Title IX during the current administration, and having a process in place to make sure that students are educated about what Title IX is from year to year is going to be critically important. I think Ms. Marin mentioned the training that we've gone through as board members, and I'm sure we've all heard from students who have questions about Title IX before, and we've connected them with staff to make sure that they get the correct answers. But the reason why there are so many questions out there is because people are not getting what they need to arm themselves with the facts of the matter. So I completely support this, and I think it's a novel and idea that will likely be replicated around the state once we get it going.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. Ms. Cohen.
Ditto to all of that. I think when we looked at, for years, we've seen the youth surveys come back, and such a huge percentage of kids, and in particular, young women who express that at school, they have been sexually harassed in some way. And it's, long been a frustration to me of what can we, as a board, what can we do? And I think, we all very candidly had conversations last year with some of the changes that had happened in the previous administration around Title IX, of really expressing this frustration of what can we do? How can we better protect victims here. And I think this is such a smart way to get at it. My 16 and 15-year-olds come home all the time with stories about different things floating around with their school, and I say, here's what, find that person, tell them this is who they talk to, this is how this needs to happen. But I think the idea of actually talking to the students, right now, they don't feel heard, and we're seeing it in any number of ways. And I'm grateful that they feel like they can walk out and be heard and hopefully get some attention to something they are seeing every day. And I think, now more than ever, I want them to know we hear you. We hear you, we agree this is not acceptable, and we want to help be part of the solution, and we want you to help be part of the solution. As Carl said about gun violence prevention, this is a problem for adults to fix, but we have to give students the ability to know what are the mechanisms in place to protect them. So thank you both. I can't thank you enough. I've shared with this board before as a victim of sexual assault when I was in middle school. I sure would have appreciated knowing what my rights were and having the support to tackle it. So this means a lot to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Ms. McLaughlin?
So I fully support the proposal here. I do want to make sure, Dr. Braybrand, that a key component of the information that your team will prepare and bring back to us is all of the voluntary resolution agreements that Fairfax County has entered into with the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education. It's my understanding that FCPS entered into yet another voluntary resolution agreement in December 2020, and I don't recall as a board member having us walk through that and understand it. And so to something Ms. Marin said, we do have a fire hose of information coming at a part-time board. So just like Ms. Marin hasn't looked at some of this stuff that she was remiss in saying she wished she had, that's the bottom line of why we have a superintendent and leadership team to be doing the day-to-day operational work. And so I don't fault Ms. Marin or any one of us on gun violence or this. But what we do need is for our board to be brought information in a timely manner. And this is sort of painful to me as we sit and talk about this very important topic. And I think about how many voluntary resolution agreements this school system has entered into, even just since 2014. Mr. Foster, is it 2 or 3 voluntary resolution agreements that we have?
I don't have that information in front of me. I didn't know that that was going to come up in this presentation on the forum topic.
Yeah.
I could certainly get that and get that to you.
No, I appreciate that, but I mean, I think that's important. The reason that this system enters into a voluntary resolution agreement is because we're agreeing to take actionable steps. So if we're not doing that, then we're not able to continue the monitoring role that we have as school board members and frankly as the superintendent. So I think that this next work session is going to be very important for everything that's been stated by board members here to date. But I also want to emphasize that when a division agrees with a federal agency that we're going to take these voluntary steps, that's a really good roadmap. And we just need to spend our time making sure we're fulfilling that roadmap. And I do want to say, Dr. Braybrand, that I have appreciated your authenticity into helping us get better with this. And I appreciate our expert, Catherine Carroll, in her work in this. But I also want to make one fine point to something Dr. Anderson said. You all know I've continued to be about restorative justice, and especially when harassment occurs at middle school level, elementary school level, young kids do not sometimes know what they're doing, and so we've got to help everybody understand. They may think they're teasing, but that's not what it is. That's the point of the education. Yep.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan, followed by Mr. Nekofex.
Yes, I want to thank my colleagues for bringing this forward as well, and agree with many of the comments that have been made earlier. I do really like the idea that Ms. Pekarsky brought up in involving our students, and I would really hope that we would utilize the expertise that we have in instructional services to really work with students to gain a solution-oriented, action and ideas. I think our students are, in the middle of this and concerned about this and confused about this. And I think that, really sitting down with them and coming up with some solid solutions is a great idea. I do like that word clarity, and also appreciate Mr. Frisch bringing up the fact that we have seen just within our tenure changes at the federal level. So anticipating changes again for myself, for the adults here and, staff and our students. I think it's really important to have this, the training and have it evolve to, quickly match, what's coming down at the federal level. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nekofex.
I support this. I do have a question, though, either for the maker of the motion, maybe I'm not understanding it correctly. It's currently part of our SR&R, and that's we know how that's administered. It's kind of a comprehensive, one day, done, check off the box kind of thing, and it's a lot of information in there. But I guess my ask is, do you have suggestions for how, I know I have suggestions, or you could, or Dr. Brabrand, are you and your team already at work on this? I'm a little confused as to what the work session will yield for us if we're not providing information now, kind of at least guiding where we would like it to go, from where it is to where we would like it to be.
So one of the reasons that we brought to the board and to Dr. Brabrand and his team was the example of Charlotte Mecklenburg, which is scaffolded over time. So it starts with, in kindergarten, having those discussions about what harassment is. What our SR&R typically does is it really focuses on when things get to a disciplinary level. What the focus of this is to actually educate our students from a very young age about how their words and their actions impact others when it comes to harassment. And so it's more of a starting at the very youngest age to create an understanding and appreciation, and it reinforces, the SR&R obviously reinforces the disciplinary aspects of it.
Right. So, go ahead, you.
No, I was just going to add to that, and while we do have this in our curriculum, I think there is definite area for improvement from looking what some other divisions are doing, and I think our staff have been thinking about that, and perhaps have some ways that they could, better beef up, if you will, or prop up what we're already doing.
Right, okay. So, and Dr. Brabrand, you, go ahead. Do you have an understanding of kind of where, or, because we've been talking about this for a while. This has been brewing in the background for a while, even though it's just a new forum topic today. That's more out of
I think
time
this is,
constraints
I
than
think this
anything
is
else.
almost similar to what we were just dealing with when we were having the earlier forum topic. We've done work, the board has done work and directed staff to do work. And this board and the prior board, we did major investments in our Title IX. We completely built and developed almost $1 million in a Title IX office to be robust with expertise to support schools and departments to make sure that Title IX rules were understood, that there was training, and there was follow-up. But there's probably still room to grow. The couple of things in here is, what enhancements can we do to the curriculum is what I'm hearing. Can we engage kids? And again, we've talked a little. I don't have the plan yet about a student task force. I would need to talk to Dr. Boyd and Dr. Presidio. I must admit, Dr. Boyd has been engaged, as you might imagine, in other matters during this pandemic more than that. But we have rich outreach right now to kids through our SAC, our Student Advisory Council, and through our SEALs, our equity ambassadors, to start to get some of that kind of feedback. What I really don't have for you today is the timeline. This is another one where I'd really have to work with our staff and ask what's a reasonable timeline. And there's not one on here. I know it's as soon as we can. I'd want to go back, and I don't know, Dr. Presidio, if you'd have anything to add, but I'd want to work with staff and come up with a reasonable timeline and give you guys that over the next couple of weeks, what that timeline would look like. But we know it's another one of these things in the news day to day. It's coming back to the top of the student experience and the parent experience. What have we done? What else can we do? And that's what you want an update with some suggestions, and you provided a few things in your roadmap to look at.
Sally,
And I mean, I would just say, I think Ms. Cohen said it best. Yes, we've done a lot. Yes, there's more we can do looking at what, some other places are doing. And our kids are telling us that they need us to do more. So that right there, to me, warrants, say, a deeper dive. And we'll work on the timeline. We're still in the pandemic, trying to do many, many things. So I think we realize that there are many competing responsibilities right now, but this is important, especially as kids are coming back into the school, after a prolonged timeout and re-engaging with other students. It's more important than ever, I think. So.
Right, and I do want to say, and I think somebody said it was left out here, maybe not intentionally, but the social media, that has to be addressed. I know it's addressed in many ways, but in this particular topic, that sometime is the catalyst from going something that is smaller to something that becomes gigantic because of social media and what it can do and how it can spread. So I think that has to be really addressed on what we can do, how we can continue to train kids. And I do appreciate Ms. McLaughlin's comments about restorative, particularly in younger kids, because they don't know what they're doing. Right. They don't. And that is maybe my perfect example of social media, where a little snide comment, but you put it on social media, a 12-year-old, and now it's there in perpetuity, and it can be extremely hurtful to the victim, as well as that child not really even knowing what they're doing. So I appreciate this, support it, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kofax. Ms. Omesh?
Thank you, and thank you to my colleagues for bringing this forward. I think it's especially timely given the sentiment in our community, as Ms. Corbett-Sanders articulated, and we want to certainly be very clear about where we stand on this. I trust that Mr. Foster will handle the timing and figuring out where that fits within the timeline of evolving law and or policy or direction of where this country is going on this topic. So I won't bring that up. I'm hopeful that as we think about developing this curriculum, we're mindful of being inclusive of various perspectives into what, the various dimensions we may not otherwise consider as to how different communities interface with this topic, how it may be received and conveyed in a way that is culturally competent from that angle. So I hope that there's some exploration of that as we work on this, developing this. And then finally, I don't know if this is, it's a little bit outside of the scope, but it might be valuable to consider even what enhancements may be done on a broader level to further bolster these rights. And what I mean by that is from a facilities standpoint, perhaps even as we think, ahead as a division. I know we've had some informal conversations just around how, privacy and how kids engage with one another within the building and what's required of them in terms of changing practices and things like that before and after PE. Those are all things we might want to continue to think about as we evolve as a society and how we think around these topics, what privacy looks and feels like, to minimize incidents or even just exposure that may lead to more vulnerable situations for our students in the building. So I put that out there maybe for staff to think about, the direction we may head in. Maybe that's, just a point or two of what additional ways we can expand on on protections around this beyond the training, if folks would be amenable to that. But I certainly want to make sure that inclusive piece I shared is a part of this regardless.
Ms. Keys-Gamarra?
Yes, thank you. Just listening to my colleagues and trying to make sure that some things are included here. And I agree with Ms. Derenak Kofax with respect to social media, but I can tell you in my work, it is not always put on social media. It can be a simple text or message sent electronically, and then we have students that can become court involved. So I'd like to make sure, one thing I would like for us to consider is that this board receive a regular Title IX report covering the topics that we've discussed today, including what is the status of, obviously enclosed, any legal actions and things of that nature, making sure that we are yearly at a minimum given an update on the status of compliance. It should include training for our staff members, information available to preventative steps taken to make sure that students stay out of trouble. That's my favorite approach. And to clarify student understanding. I think that even if it is written, we should be receiving that on a regular basis, and nobody should have to bring forward a forum topic to get an update on such an important topic. So I would ask the makers of this motion to consider that as part of consideration for how we move forward from here.
Yeah, I definitely think that can be something that we can discuss with the work session as part of the next, next steps with this. Thank you. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, go ahead.
Quickly clarify, the discussion over social media, there is a large component of that in the Charlotte Mecklenburg education curriculum. And so that was part of what we were thinking was going to happen.
Yes, and I want to make sure that it's not always on Snapchat or whatever.
Yes.
But if it's shared in any way electronically, it takes it to a whole nother level. And I've had to help students, to the best of my ability, try to maneuver out of that. I'd like to make sure that our students are notified that this can result and try to prevent these types of instances.
Absolutely. And the last piece I will just say, you did touch upon it, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, but I think we need to just lift it up, is the neurodiverse education. It perhaps requires a little more definitely more than what is in there already, and maybe even more than what we do for our general population of students. And this has been brought up repeatedly in different discussions that we have, but it is something we need to look at particularly closely when we are updating this curriculum and when we have our discussion. And with that, Ms. McLaughlin?
Yeah, I didn't hear it mentioned, so I just wanted to make sure it's part of the direction for staff that we will get a status update on our existing voluntary resolution agreements.
As part of the whole
Yeah.
I think Dr.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and take a census, although I think we have it. Everyone in support of moving this forward, please raise your hands, and that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. If we could take just a 5-minute break and then start, we'll try to get us back on track.